You can be seated. Stay waive the call?
Waive the call.
Next waive the call?
Yes, sir.
You can proceed, General.
Get our next witness, Sheriff Channon.
Hello, Your Honor.
Hello.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give in the hearing of this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please have a seat.
For the record, give us your name, please.
Jimmy J.J. Jones.
And you're the former sheriff of Knox County, is that correct?
I am.
And give us, the jury, a little bit about your background in law enforcement and how you came to be sheriff and what you're doing now.
I started at the sheriff's office in 1980 as a correctional officer. I went out on patrol 1982. I worked my way up into the detective division. I was a lieutenant over the major crimes section. I was the chief of detectives and ultimately the administrative chief. And then in 2007, I was appointed sheriff.
That'd be the later part of 2007.
It was February.
February 2007. So in January 2007, what was your position with the sheriff?
I was administrative chief.
And the sheriff was Tim Hutchinson at the time?
It was.
In January of 2007, early part of January 2007, did you have occasion to learn of murders that had occurred in Chipman Street?
I did.
And what was the sheriff department's response to that?
Sheriff Hutchinson had responded to help, and he wanted me to go with him to help also.
And when you say go with him, where did you go?
Well, on the day in question, on the 11th, we went to London, Kentucky, or Lebanon, Kentucky, I'm sorry.
Okay. How'd you get there?
We went in a helicopter,
And
the Knox County Sheriff's Office helicopter.
And you recall who all went up there from the sheriff's department?
Detective Neville Norman and Sheriff Hutchinson.
Any others that you know?
There was a couple of pilots and other people, but basically it was just us three that
And what was the purpose of going to Lebanon, Kentucky?
to find the suspects that had left from the Chipman Street address.
And when you got to Lebanon, were you able to locate the individuals in question?
We were.
And where did you first encounter them?
We ultimately met at the police department. Then, along with the Kentucky State Police, we went to the residence where the individuals were.
And were you able to locate those individuals?
We were.
And eventually conduct some interviews?
We did.
Now, back in June 2007, and even since then, have you received training in interrogation techniques and the like when it comes to interrogating suspects?
Yes, I was lucky. I'm sorry, you'll have to bear with me. My allergies are running amok. But I was lucky enough to work for a sheriff who believed in training, and I received many hours of training on many different things. But yes, interviewing technique, homicide investigation, all those types of things.
And during your career in law enforcement, have you had occasion to interview few or many suspects?
Many.
Now, getting back to January 11th in Kentucky, do you recall the order in which you interviewed these individuals?
Yes, Vanessa Coleman was first, Cobbins was second, and Mr. Thomas was third.
And the interviews, all of them, were they recorded?
They were.
On what type of recording?
CDs.
Okay. And as it relates to Mr. Thomas, you said he was the last of the three that you interviewed?
He was.
And when you, before you interviewed him, of course, did you go over his Miranda rights with him?
Yes, sir, we did.
Now, I take that at that time he was not under arrest, is that correct? Or he was being detained?
Yes.
But he was not charged with it?
No.
Is that correct? Didn't have an attorney?
No.
But you went over the rights with him?
Absolutely.
Where he would agree to talk with you?
Absolutely.
Now, as you were interviewing Mr. Thomas, did you have some idea of involvement of individuals in these crimes down here?
We did. There was communication back and forth between law enforcement here and law enforcement there about things that were going on here in Knoxville also.
And when you began to interview Mr. Thomas, did you have at least a nickname E as someone that might possibly be involved?
We did.
So did you have that information in that interview?
Yes.
And I'll ask you, if early on in that interview, you asked Mr. Thomas if he remembered a short, bald-headed, light-skinned black dude showing up over there, and was he in his own car? And Mr. Thomas saying short, and you I guess kind of interject, they called him E, you remember that?
Yes,
Part
I
of
do.
the interview? And
He immediately responded
Okay.
that he knew him.
That he knew it? Did he hesitate at all?
None whatsoever. That was what I thought was very pertinent about that question. He immediately responded when I gave him the nickname.
Didn't say who you talking about? What you talking
No,
about?
immediately said yes. I remember.
And a little later on in that interview, asking Mr. Thomas, do you remember a point in time where Slim and E, and for the record, who was Slim known to you at that time?
Mr. Davidson,
And where Slim and E and Rome, who was Rome,
Coppins.
all left together in Slim's car, or in E's car, and you stayed there, you and Vanessa, and I guess Sheriff Hutchinson says Saturday night, and you say Saturday evening, and Mr. Thomas says, yeah, you remember that?
Yes.
Again, how did he respond? His demeanor when he responded?
It's like I said. It was there was no apprehension, no trying to think. He just immediately responded like one would if you were asked a question and you knew the answer to it.
And then shortly after that, you remember giving this question, Mr. Thomas, okay, all right, at some point in time, a white SUV came back with Slim and E, and Rome was driving E's car. You remember?
I do.
This question? Do you remember that? You came out to the front little sunroom porch. Do you remember that? And he said, yeah.
Yes,
Again, did he answer in the same manner?
he did.
With the same speed?
Exactly.
And the same demeanor?
Yes.
And just right after that, asking this question, okay, do you remember when E and Slim got out of the car, they had a white guy and white girl with them, and they had blindfold over their eyes and their hands was tied? And him responding, yeah, I remember seeing that.
Yes, sir. And I also, again, I think that's a very pertinent question because if you didn't see someone blindfolded and hands tied, and I ask you that question, you certainly would say, no, I didn't see anything like that. But he responded, yes.
And a little later on in there, asking him, they're talking about the white dude, I guess, is what Mr. Thomas may have referred to him. And you asking this question, well, how was, I'm sorry, Clint's on page 8. I apologize for not giving the page for the other transcript. When you saw him, how was he? And Mr. Thomas responding, when I saw him, he was blindfolded or something. And you asked him, was his hands tied? And Mr. Thomas saying, I'm pretty sure they was.
Yes, that's correct.
And throughout this interview, Mr. Thomas has given you some responses, but was he being totally forthcoming with you?
No, and that's typical. You can be forthcoming until you start to get yourself involved with it. Then you want to distance yourself from the event. You will go up to a certain point, and then you will distance yourself from the event, so it's like you aren't there or you didn't have anything to do with it. That's quite typical.
And is that what you got from Mr. Thomas?
Absolutely.
Again, when you're talking to him again about who all's there when they come back on page 12, I guess Detective Norman asked when they came back, and Mr. Thomas said, "Yeah, that's when I saw all three of them," and I was looking like, okay, and you asked three of them being, and he says Slim, E, and Rome.
Correct.
Again, giving you that information.
Yes.
Did he give it to you as he described previously?
Yes.
And then right after that, asking, I guess Detective Norman asked him, was E's car there too? And answered, yes, his car was there.
Yes.
And again, asked again, and they were both all they were all tied up, and he answered, yeah.
Yes, every time that came up, he answered yes to that, each and every time.
And then Mr. Thomas saying a little later on, basically what I know, that the girl went into the room, and the old boy, they took him back out. And you asked who took him back out, and he said, well, it was E and Slim, because they took him back. They took him outside.
Yes.
And then a little later on, Mr. Thomas saying, well, they came inside, and that's when we was looking like, okay. Then they took the dude out, took him outside, and you asked who took him out. Again, he said it was E and Slim, I believe, took him outside.
Yes, correct.
You asked him if he ever see a pistol, and he'd say, I've seen a lot of pistols.
Yeah, I think at that point in time, he had realized that we knew what he knew. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And he was, I think that was an attempt to be coy with me when he said, I've seen a lot of pistols. And so then I kind of ratcheted up the conversation, and he ultimately said he had a pistol.
And then, I guess shortly after that, asked him again about the dude and who left. And he said the dude and he left, the dude being Mr. Newsom.
Yes, that's correct.
And I believe that's where you said you ratcheted up a little bit about this gun a little bit.
Yes.
Is that correct? I believe you described that to him as like fishing.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. And you asked him, or Detective Norman asked him, did he have a gun? Did Slim have a gun when they left? And him saying he had a gun.
He did.
When they left. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then right after that, you asked, okay, so E and this white guy leaving the car, and he said, uh-huh.
Correct.
An affirmative answer.
Yes, an affirmative answer. Yes.
Okay. And then you ask him again when they come back, who comes back? And he answers, he came back. You say, by himself? He said, he came back. And you say, no white dude? Not unless he was inside the car.
That's correct.
Yes. Give that answer
He did.
Quickly to you?
Yes.
And asking again about the gun. Mr. Thomas, our Detective Norman asked him, did he have a gun with him? And Mr. Thomas responded, I mean, I didn't see no gun, but I'm pretty sure he had one. And Detective Norman saying, but you saw he had one when he left? And Mr. Thomas saying, yeah, I mean, I know he had a gun.
Right. That's correct.
And go on to describe it as a black gun, and he thought it was a revolver.
He thought it was a revolver. Yes, sir.
And you recall toward the end of the interview, talking about asking Mr. Thomas about going over to some apartments in this SUV, and Detective Norman talking about when you all had the music playing real loud. And he acknowledged, yeah, okay, I remember, I just said we went a couple of places.
Yeah, a couple of places, I think is what he said.
And you also remember asking about him trying to leave, but they wouldn't let him leave with this question: why couldn't you leave? And Mr. Thomas gave the answer, because ain't nobody, I mean, didn't nobody want nobody to leave at that? And you asked, who didn't want nobody to leave? And he says, E mainly.
Yes, that's correct.
And again, the E that he's talking about is there for
It is.
defendant sees over here.
Yes, sir, it is.
And then just toward the very end, you remember Mr. Thomas telling you, he left out with the old boy, then when we left, we came back, I mean, I didn't see the girl, and I know I didn't see the boy.
Correct.
Again, with giving you that information still, that even at the end of that interview, did you feel like you were still holding back?
Oh, yeah, of course. And at some point in time, you have to end it. It can't just keep going on and on and on. So at some point, you come to the point where you think this is all he's going to give us. And what he gave us, I thought was very truthful. I thought he was the most truthful one that I talked to. But you never get the whole truth, ever. I've been doing this for 39 years, and it just doesn't happen. And
again, these are questions and answers that were given back in January 2007, correct?
That's correct.
That's with
Cross-examination.
Needless to say, it had been a long day whenever you were talking to Mr. Thomas.
It had been a very long day.
I gather the helicopter ride was not a fun.
It was not fun at all.
Rough trip.
It was very rough.
And when you got there, I believe you said you first talked to Ms. Coleman. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And then you spoke to Mr. Cobbins, correct?
That's correct.
All right. So you had already talked to Mr. Cobbins before you had gone into the interview room with Mr. Thomas, right?
Correct.
And of course, with the training that you've received, you understand that when you interview different types of individuals, there are some individuals who are at least susceptible to suggestion, correct?
Correct.
And one of the ways to safeguard against when you're talking to one of those individuals is to not feed them details, correct?
Well, I would disagree with you on that. I would prefer to call it jogging the memory. The human mind, sometimes when incidents occur, when you talk about them, you will remember more about that incident than you did initially.
But you would agree with me that there are such things as false confessions.
I'm sorry.
There are such things as false confessions.
Yes.
Yes. And one way that an officer can inadvertently elicit a false confession is to provide details about the crime that was committed, correct?
Well, I don't know about that. I would say that some questions that are asked, such as the question about the boy and the girl being blindfolded and handcuffed, that would be what I would call a shocker question to elicit a response that if you had not seen that, your response would immediately be, no, that didn't happen.
But that was not a detail that Mr. Thomas had provided you up to that point in the interview.
No.
And this was fairly early on in this interview, correct?
It was early on.
Okay. And those particular details, you said that you had gotten information that had come to you from Knoxville, is that correct?
There was information coming back and forth from Knoxville, yes.
Primarily Daphne Sutton?
I do not know the answer to that.
Okay. But at that point in time, had they talked to LaMarcus Davidson that you're aware of?
Yes.
Okay, so you had talked to him.
No, I had not talked to him.
No, but
he had been apprehended in Knoxville.
Okay, and investigators had talked to him.
I assume, I do not know that.
Okay. But at least as far as who you had talked to, you had talked to Latavius Cobbins first, correct?
Coleman first, then Cobbins.
And then Cobbins. Before you talked to Mr. Thomas, you talked to Mr. Cobbins.
Correct.
All right. And so the detail about these two people showing up, being bound and blindfolded, was that something that you had gotten from Mr. Cobbins?
No, I don't think so. I don't recall that.
Or was that a detail from where?
I think that was a detail.
From at the crime scene?
I can't say for sure.
Okay. And about E being involved, a short, bald, light-skinned black dude. That
yes,
detail.
And that was very early on, and that was after he was the best of my recollection is that was because he was apprehended with Mr. Davidson.
Okay, so E, the whole reason that he even came up as being a person of interest is because he had been there when Mr. Davidson was taken into custody.
I don't know about that if that's the way it was in Knoxville. Mm-hmm. I knew that from him being with Mr. Davidson.
But Mr. Thomas did not mention E.
Mr. Thomas, when asked about E, first said he knew an E in Kentucky. Then almost immediately he said, well, I don't know if it was there or not, because I was getting my stuff in a hurry to leave.
Yeah. And at least when you
And
first...
that was the only thing that was said about E from Mr. Collins.
Okay. And then, on who? Who were you just referring to?
I'm sorry?
Which suspect?
You asked the question if Mr. Cobbin said anything about E.
Okay. Okay. Now, but again, bringing up the E, you're the one who said, you remember the short, bald-headed, light-skinned black dude showing up over there.
I did.
And that was a detail that you provided.
It was.
And at least at first, you know, his response was a short, and then you even told him, they called him E.
Correct.
And at that point, he says, yeah, I remember seeing him, correct?
Exactly. As soon as I said E, he immediately responded.
Yeah. And then Sheriff Hutchinson, at that point in time, brings up about Slim and E and Rome all left together. So the detail about Slim and E and Rome leaving together in E's car, that was something, again, that was provided by detectives, correct?
I'm not sure.
And then certainly about them coming back up to the sun porch, that, again, was something that y'all first brought up in your interview with Mr. Thomas.
About Mr. Thomas being on the sun porch?
About the white SUV coming back with Slim and E and Rome.
Yes, and we had received information that he was on the sun porch, and that's why I used that to jog his memory. And he immediately said, yes, I remember that.
But that was information you got from somewhere else.
Yes.
And he agreed. He was going along with what you were saying.
He did.
And again, with them being blindfolded and their hands tied, that was information that y'all brought up and that he was agreeing with.
Yes.
And then as the interview progressed and he was providing details, he was, in a sense, reaffirming those details that were first provided. Correct?
That's correct, yes.
Now, and he was a little difficult. I mean, he's a little difficult to interview. He wasn't too forthcoming.
Well, and not many individuals are.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes you'll get somebody who will bare their soul, but that's pretty unusual.
Yes, very unusual.
And this was one of those that you're having to draw it out.
It's always give and take. Yes.
Yes. And so he wasn't coming off with too much about what had happened there, but on the stuff that he agreed with, he
didn't want to. He just didn't want to put himself. He didn't want to implicate himself.
But again, he was just reaffirming information that initially had been provided by y'all.
Correct.
All right. Thank you.
Anything further in this witness?
Oh, no.
Thank you, sir.
Maybe.
Any objection to it being?
No, you're not.
Free to go.
Lee, thank you.
Tim Shea. Your Honor, apologize. Witnesses is not here.
I think we're moving at a pretty quick pace.
We're waiting on Tim Shea. He tells us he'll be here in 10 minutes. Apologize. Yeah, we can do that. We can call witness out. We call. Call in. Go y'all. Yeah. Go y'all. Stand up there.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give in the hearing of this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please have a seat.
Please introduce yourself.
I'm Mary Newsom.
And Ms. Newsom, your relationship with Chris Newsom.
I'm his mother.
If you could, let's go back to January 2007. Recall Saturday afternoon, or start Saturday morning.
Saturday morning, Chris got up and he was an avid golfer, and that's what he was going to do all day long, was play golf.
Now, Tell us, when he went to play, did you know who he was playing golf with?
I knew he was playing with Josh Anderson, who was one of the people he was playing with, and if there was somebody else, I'm not sure who other people were.
Now, tell us a little bit about Chris. Did he work? Did he go to school? What did he do?
Well, he graduated from Halls High School. At the time of this happening, he was 23 years old and he was working. He had a job, several jobs. First of all, he went to a school in Orlando for motorcycle repair and watercraft repair, and he was certified in that and decided that's what he wanted to do. And he did that for about a year and a half and had a job doing that, and he didn't enjoy it. So he wanted to go back to carpentry, which he really enjoyed. He was a trim carpenter, and he made a lot of different projects and things with his hands. He loved working with his hands, and he did that. He was working for B&F Construction when this happened, and helped build some beautiful homes.
Now, did you come to learn about a Christian, Channon Christian?
Yes, that was his girlfriend.
And do you know how long they had been dating?
It wasn't that long. I believe they started dating in October.
And so then jumping ahead to January 2007, that first Saturday, you said he was going to play golf.
Yes.
Tell us about, after playing golf, did you see him again?
Yes, he came home to get ready for a date that he had. He came home to take a shower and said he was going to go out with Channon that night. And when he came down the steps that night, that was the last time I saw him. And before he left, I said, Chris, I think you should get something to eat. And he said, no. He said, I'm taking Channon out to eat, and then we're going to a party over at Jamie's house. And I said, okay.
Were you expecting him back that night?
I didn't know for sure, because sometimes when he'd go out, he'd stay the night, and sometimes he'd come back home. He was 23 at the time, so I couldn't question him too much. He was kind of on his own.
So did you hear from him later on that night?
No.
Was that odd?
It wasn't that odd that night, because I didn't really expect him home that night, so it wasn't anything strange.
Did something happen the next day that caught your attention?
The next day, when we got a phone call from Shannon's mother, and Channon hadn't showed up at work, that started a panic at our house.
So what did you then do?
Started calling Chris to see if he was, would answer me, because any other time if I called Chris, he would call back. Not always immediately, but he would call back. And he wouldn't call back, and I kept calling several different times and saying, Chris, please call me, let me know you're okay. Never got the call. So we decided to call the police. And of course, when they're 23, the police won't start looking for them until after 24 hours. But it was very unusual for him to be not calling home or checking in at home. So they said they couldn't really help at all, but what we should do is just start calling the hospitals and see if anybody showed up at the hospital. So that's what we did. We started calling, and then what I can remember is it wasn't until the next morning, though, that somebody, showed up at the door, and I started calling the family to let the family know that Chris was not home and he was missing. So the family started coming over, and we were waiting for him. We stayed up all night waiting for him and kept trying to call him. And I think it was around 2 o'clock in the morning when we found out that somebody had found their car, and the kids were not around the car. So we knew at that time that something bad must have happened to them, because they wouldn't have left the car like that. And then there was a bunch of the friends did come over that night and said they didn't want to let me know that Chris was missing, because they knew I'd get upset, so they put off coming over. But when they finally did, then we really, really got concerned about it. And we didn't hear anything until the next morning, and that's when Snotterly came over and the chaplain came over and someone else and told us that the body that they had found on the railroad tracks was Grace. And after that, I just kind of lost it and didn't remember much of anything for the next 2 weeks. It was just unbelievable. I just couldn't believe that that had happened.
I want to go through just a couple of the pictures about some of Chris's personal items. You recognize the ball cap in Exhibit 140?
I do. Chris loved wearing the ball cap, and he always turned it around the opposite way.
Okay.
And I can't see the other cap there hardly, but I know it's the D&F cap.
Yes, ma'am.
That's his work cap.
All right, let's see if that's in the next picture.
Yeah, that's
146.
his work cap.
All right. Exhibit 150, did Chris dip Copenhagen?
Yes, unfortunately.
All right. Now, in 161, those are the two hats there again.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to the next one.
Yes.
Did you ever get his license back?
No.
It's 189. So if I can direct your attention, do you see his car keys?
I see him.
You see them?
Yes.
Is that them there?
Yes, it looks like him.
What type of vehicle did he have?
He had a Chevy Silverado 1500.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You have a problem with that? No questions. Step down. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm the evidence you're about to give in the hearing of this cause will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Yes, sir. Please have a seat.
Give the jury your name, please, ma'am.
Deena Christian.
You're mother of Channon Christian.
Yes, I am.
Taking your attention back to January 2007. January 6th specifically, you remember that day?
I do.
And did you have contact with Channon on that day?
Yes, sir, I did.
Tell the jury about that, please.
Well, she woke up that morning. She had to be at work at noon. So she got up and took a shower. It was a Saturday, so I was home cleaning house. When she got out of the shower, I had folded some laundry, so I took some clothes in there for her, put it on her bed, and I just sat down and we started talking. She was trying to decide what to wear on her date that night.
So she had work that day. Where did she work?
She worked at the shoe department in West Town Mall, and she also worked for Specialty Select at Fort Sanders Hospital.
So two different jobs?
Yes, and she was a senior at the University of Tennessee.
In school at the time?
Yes, full load.
And working two jobs?
Yes, sir.
So with your understanding on that Saturday, in January 6th, she was to work. Did you know how long she was scheduled?
She would have worked till 9, which means she would have gotten out of there probably about 9:30. And then she was supposed to go to Kara's house, her best friend. And then they were going to go, they were supposed to go to a birthday party, but she had been sick and she had not been eating well. So Chris wanted to make sure that she got something to eat. So he wanted to take her to dinner before they went to the party.
Yeah, what time did she leave the house? She lived with y'all at the time?
Yes, she lived at home.
You know, about what time did she leave that morning?
It was probably about 11:30, 11:40, something like that.
Remember what she had on?
She had on, if I can remember correctly, these They were mini well corduroy pants and a t-shirt and these ugly shoes. Her wallabies, but they were very comfortable, she said.
Okay. And also, at that time, had she gone to donate did she have some clothes that she was going to donate or take?
Well, yeah, those had been in her forerunner because it was just about a week or so after Christmas, and she'd gotten some new clothes for Christmas. So she cleaned out her closet. She had them in sacks, you know, almost like a gift bag kind of thing that they give you when you have a lot of stuff. And she had several of those in the back of her car full of clothes that she was going to donate.
Now tell us about this vehicle that she had.
She had a silver 4Runner Sport. That was her dream car.
And how, you recall what year it was, how new it was?
It was brand new when she got it. I'm not exactly sure of the model, but it was probably around 2006 or 5, something like that.
And was there a rule about keeping that vehicle clean?
Oh yes, her daddy was a stickler about cars being clean. He was constantly arguing with us about keeping our car clean, but it might be messy inside, but if there was dirt or a spot or anything, she made dang sure it came off before Daddy came home. So.
Now, on that January 6th, that Saturday, what was the last time you had any contact with her?
When she walked out the door to go to work, I was standing there and I told her, you know, to have a good day and to be careful and that I loved her. And she walked out the door and said, "Love you too, I'll see you later."
And what, were you expecting her home?
No, sir.
And why is that?
She was a senior at the University of Tennessee living at home, and her brother was in Greenville at college. So we told her rather than, she didn't want to live in the dorm and she didn't want an apartment, we told her we'd give her some freedom, but the deal was she just let me know what was going on, if she was coming home or where she was. So she was very good about doing that.
And what were her plans?
Her plans that night were to go to work and then go to Kara's and get ready for the party, or go eat and then go to the party.
And spend the night with Kara?
Yes. Whether it was at Kara's apartment or Jamie's, I knew she would be safe and she'd be with Kara.
And did she take some clothing and?
Yes, she took an overnight bag.
For the stay over? I guess.
Yes.
All right. So all through the day, anything else unusual happened?
She called me sometime that afternoon, and I'm not sure exactly what time it was. It might have been around 5 o'clock, 4:35, something like that, and told me that she'd gotten off early. They had overbooked people to work, so she volunteered to go home early since she had plans. And she was on her way to Kara's, but she was going to go by Walgreens and get Kara some shampoo, and then she was going to go get ready.
The plan still being to go to the party?
Yes,
If
sir.
something need to go to the party?
Yes, sir.
Stay with Kara
Or Jamie's, yes.
Okay. Did you talk with her anymore after that?
She called the house about 12:30 that night, or Sunday morning, whatever, but I didn't get to talk to her. I was in the restroom and the phone rang, so I hollered at her dad to grab the phone because, you know, at 12:30 you're not usually expecting the phone to ring.
And after that call, did you talk to Gary about
I did,
that phone call?
because I could tell by his side of the conversation that he was talking to her.
Okay.
So before he went back to sleep, I'm like, you know, what'd she say, what was going on? And he said that she was planning to come home around 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. They were going to finish watching a movie.
And did she say where she was?
She was at Kara's apartment, is what she said.
What she said? Okay. So when you heard that, what did you do to?
Well, I figured something just had changed. You know, the plans changed. Maybe they didn't have the party or whatever, and I just expected her to be home. So I'm a night owl, and I was sitting there watching TV, and I thought, well, I'm still up. I'll wait. Because her dad was asleep, and her brother was asleep, and we had 4 dogs at the time. And I thought I'd just watch for her to come in, because I could see, sitting in my bed watching TV, I could see the street behind us.
Okay.
And when I saw the lights coming down the street, I was just going to go open the garage door so the dogs wouldn't freak out and wake their daddy and her brother.
At that phone call around 12:30, after that phone call, was there any alarm between you and Gary?
No,
about
because
the phone call?
she did what she said she was going to do. You know, I heard her dad say, "I love you," and that I knew the conversation was over, so I immediately asked him what was going on. But at that time, there was no concern because she called, her plans changed, she called, and I was just expecting her to be there. And then about 3, I looked up and saw it was 3:30 and she wasn't home, and that's when I started getting worried.
And what'd you do?
I called her phone.
When you called her phone, you know about
That
what
was-
time it was?
It was around 3:30 in the morning. There was no answer, 3 or 3:30, something like that. There was no answer. I waited a few minutes, I called again, and it would go straight to voicemail. I'd wait a few more minutes, and it might ring or go straight to voicemail, but it constantly did that all morning long or all night long.
Do you know about how many times you tried to call?
I don't know, sir. I called several times, and I was starting to get concerned because the one thing I know, even if she was asleep, if it woke her up, she would call home right away. She would call mom and dad right back.
And you said some of the calls would just ring and then go to voicemail, and some of them would go directly to voicemail. Did I understand that
Yes,
correctly?
sir. It's like, you know, when you turn your phone off, it goes straight to voicemail, right? Well, it would ring and ring and ring and then go to voicemail. And then the next time I'd call, it wouldn't even ring. It would go straight to her voicemail. So I thought that was kind of odd. I was starting to get a bad feeling, but I didn't know. I worry a lot anyway, so.
So when the phone went straight to voicemail, did you think her phone was off at that point in time?
I thought, well, did her phone die at first? So I just picked up and called again, and then it would ring, 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 ring. And so I was a little confused.
So it back and forth with
Yes, sir.
that type of thing. Okay. So what's the next thing that you did?
Well, I finally fell asleep for a couple of hours, I guess. And then I woke up, her dad was getting ready for work, and I'm like, well, dang it, she still ain't called me back. And he said, well, call her back.
And did you
So I did.
get an answer
I went to voicemail.
straight to, or did it ring and ring?
Well, I called her several times that morning too, and it did the same thing. One minute it might ring, and the next minute it wouldn't. And I did leave a voicemail at one point earlier on or later in that morning after it was daylight. You know, I'm like, "Now, dang it, Shannon, you know, this is your mom. You need to call me back. Call me back now," because I was getting a little concerned.
I told you never heard back from her.
No, sir.
You ever got a call from her phone?
No, and I'd also tried to call her best friend Kara several times because they were joined at the hip, and you know, she was like one of my own, and I couldn't get her to answer as well, and that was upsetting me, but I didn't know at the time.
Come find out she'd changed the phone.
Yeah, she finally called me sometime that afternoon, but
That's in Sunday afternoon?
yes, sir. And I asked her about Shannon and Chris, and then I think she was probably a little alarmed as well because it was not like Shannon not to call her back either, so.
So on into Sunday and Sunday afternoon, when all that's going on, what's your level of concern?
It's getting worse and worse as the day goes. I've just got, I don't call it mother's instinct or whatever. I just had a gut feeling that something wasn't right.
Now, tell us about the rest of the evening.
Well, after I talked to Kara, I think she talked to some of Chris's friends, and they were trying to think of any place they might have gone just to be alone or whatever, and couldn't get anything. So about 3 o'clock that afternoon, the phone rang, and I answered it, and it was her boss from the shoe department, Doug. And he said, "Hey, Deena." I said, "What's going on, Doug?" He said, "I'm just calling to check on Shannon." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "She was supposed to open the store at noon." And I could just feel my gut drop. And it was like, you just confirmed my worst nightmare. I knew something was wrong because she would never shuck her responsibility. I mean, she'd been there for a long time, and she even had a key, you know, and they trusted her enough to take bank statements or bank deposits to the bank and open and close the store. And that just wasn't like my daughter. I knew something was wrong with her.
So that around 3 o'clock, you say?
Yes, sir.
So when that happens, what do y'all do?
Well, I think I first called her dad and told her dad that something was wrong. And then I don't know what that conversation, I just remember calling him, and then I called the hospitals. And then I called the police. I called 911.
To report her missing?
And then they said they checked the jail for me because they needed to make sure she hadn't been arrested or nothing had gone on in that direction. So
Once you found out she wasn't in jail, or hospitals or that type
I
of thing?
filed a report over the 911 with the 911 operator, and she was very helpful and helped me. She even called me back and suggested that I possibly try to see where her phone had pinged from. I'm sorry. And I did call US Cellular, was our provider at the time, and all 4 phones were in my name. So, but they said they couldn't do it for me, that the police would have to do it. So I called back, and someone, I don't know who did it, but someone at the police department was able to call, and without a warrant, they were able to provide the information.
The pinging information?
And then they finally told us that it pinged off the Cherry Street Tower.
And did that alarm you? Even
I knew she wouldn't be anywhere on Cherry Street. She would have been scared to death to be down there.
So once you learned where that phone had pinged, what did y'all do next?
Well, I had been told by the 911 operator that a detective would call me, because, you know, I'd filed a report. And I mean, it went on, and I guess it was dark, so it was after 7 o'clock sometime, and he finally called back after I called like 2 or 3 times, waiting for a detective to call us. And it wasn't a very pleasant conversation, because he basically told me that nobody was looking for my daughter, and nobody was going to look for my daughter, and if we wanted to do something to do, or if we wanted to find her, we needed to do it ourselves. So that's exactly what we did.
And what did you do?
Well, Gary got his keys, Chase got his keys, and I was told to stay home in case she called or someone called. And of course, he didn't even know how to get to Cherry Street at the time. And he called Jack Barnes, who was a retired, I don't know if it's KPD or Knox County, but called him, and that little man got up in the late evening and went to Cherry Street, told Gary to hang on. He met him down there, and then he set them up on a grid search.
Was this late Sunday?
Sunday evening. I don't know what time it was, I just know it was dark.
That's fine.
And so I can't stand just to sit there, so I know I drove him crazy. About every 10 minutes or so, I'd probably call, you know, you got anything yet? What's going on? And he finally called me, I think, and said Chase found the car.
And did you get the information about the car being altered somehow?
No, sir, I just immediately said, I've got the spare key, I'm on my way, and I took off for Cherry Street. And when I got down there, first thing I noticed, because I came in on, is it Glider? From her rear end was facing me, and I knew the power T and the North Face stickers were gone. I could just see the rear end.
But you recognized it to be that her car?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
And when I pulled up beside them, it was drizzling, and they had called the forensics unit to come there rather than to try to cart it off, I guess. So we were just sitting around waiting on him, and I asked an officer if they'd gone door to door, and he said, no, we can't be so sure that she didn't come down here by herself. And when they opened the car, I told that officer, and excuse me, but you want what I said, I told him he was full of shit. That there was no way my daughter was down there buying drugs. And there was no way she could drive the car that way, because the seat was as far back as it would go and laid back as far back as it would go.
Did you notice anything on the outside of the car as far as?
Oh yeah, she had a powered, she loved the University of Tennessee, okay? She had a huge power T on the back rear window of the 4Runner. She had an orange North Face sticker on one side, and then she had 2 baby power T's on the back door little windows. And then she had Bevo on the front, and she had a University of Tennessee license plate on the front of the car. And when Chase turned around, he said, I know it's her car, Bevo's still there. So they had pulled every sticker off but the long one, because they couldn't see it for the rearview mirror.
Did you notice whether there'd been any lighting or anything in the car?
Oh, when they opened the car, first off, I saw the seat in the driver's side, because that was the first one, and I knew she had not driven that car. Then when they opened the back door, the floorboard was full of mud, and there was no way that would have been there. She'd been there. When they opened the back end, that whole back end would have been full of clothes. I mean, and she had her college books in the back seat. You know how girls are. They travel with a lot of things, but she had some leftover clothes, because she stayed with Carrie usually during the week, because they went to school together. So they didn't need but one parking pass. So I would usually see her at different times in the evenings when she got more clothes, or then for sure on the weekend to get her dirty clothes so Mama could wash them, so. But there was nothing there.
All that stuff was gone?
And it looked like it had been wiped down, vacuumed down, all but that mud and stuff. And then I saw her iPod wasn't in there, and then she had a picture of her granddaddy where the speedometer sits. It was gone. I mean, we were not supposed to touch the car, but we got close enough we could see in, and everything was gone. There was nothing in there except a jacket and then a few things in her glove box.
What's the next thing that happened?
We just stood there in the rain until the forensics man did his thing, and then when he opened the glove box, they asked me a couple of questions because they found a needle in her glove box with some insulin. And one of her good friends, the one they went to the party for, Jamie Hampton, was a diabetic. So I said, that wasn't Shannon's, but it was probably Jamie's.
Okay.
And then they found another bottle, I think that was Ronnie Lynn's. And I mean, these girls ran together all the time. You know, it was nothing to have. Half the time I didn't know if they were really Shannon's clothes or Kara's clothes because, you know, they were constantly switching things out. So they were always together, but it was just an empty bottle of Adderall.
So they processed that vehicle, I guess they towed it at some point?
Yes, sir. They processed it to a point, I think, and then they towed it to the impound lot.
Did there come a time then after that you learned about Mr. Newsom?
Yes, sir. I was worried about, let me back up just a little bit. Sunday afternoon, after I called the police and started filing the report, I had never met the Newsoms. So Kara didn't have their number, so I just grabbed the phone book and I looked and I saw one Hugh Newsom in Halls. I thought, well, what can it hurt? If it's the wrong one, I'll just say I'm sorry and hang up. But it was Hugh and Mary, and I explained to them that I thought we had a problem with the kids were missing.
And so they responded.
And so that's when they started looking. But once, you know, when we realized after we found her car, after they processed it and we went home for a few hours, and then the next morning, pretty much at daylight, we got up and her dad and I went to the FBI, but they couldn't help us because she was 21. You know, we couldn't get anybody to help us. We felt like we were just all alone. And so we took off for Cherry Street. And we went we didn't go door to door on the homes that were occupied, but I mean, we went into abandoned homes and warehouses. I mean, I saw some of her friends crawling under abandoned homes that they probably, places that none of us really needed to be, that weren't safe, but we were just trying to find our kid. And then
That was Monday?
that was Monday.
Monday morning.
All day Monday.
All day.
And then, I guess, I'm not exactly sure, because like Mary said, after, it was just a blur, but I think when we found out that the body on the railroad tracks was Chris's, I knew it was not going to be good for us either, but we just kept looking. And when they identified Chris's body is when KPD, Knox County, I mean, I think we had ATF, we had U.S. Marshals, we had everybody. They ended up down on the railroad tracks and asked us to get out of their way, basically. I mean, they were nice about it, but Sheriff Hutchinson had set up a command post at a little restaurant right there on Cherry Street, and that's pretty much where we stayed. Now, I know we had a few people, or Gary had a few kind of watching where they were going, because, you know, we couldn't stand just to stand there, but we weren't going anywhere till we found their daughter.
And is that where you were when you found out that Channon had been found?
Yes, sir.
Did you learn the circumstances at that time, or was it?
At that time, no, I don't believe that I did. I just, you know, they said they'd found her and she was deceased, and then all I remember screaming, and I fell apart.
And of course, from that point forward, of course, they talked to you about certain items of Shannon's that they may have found either inside this house or up in Kentucky.
Not at that time. I mean, at that time, you know, they pretty much told us, you know, we didn't know what to do. We just stood there forever for a long time, and then we went home. We just didn't know what to do. But we did have a meeting with the powers that be at one point just to kind of let us know what was going on. But they were still, at the beginning, before they found Channon, I'd gone home with a police officer and gotten a brush for the for the dog to scent to try to help find her. But, I mean, eventually, yes, they did. And there were several things throughout the years while the trials were getting ready that I kept asking, well, I know she had this bag, you know, I know she had her camera, I know she had this or that. And there were several things that we never found.
Leslie, I want to go through some photographs of exhibits that we've already introduced, I think, and see if you can help us identify them. This first picture, you recognize anything that would have
I
been shared?
do. Under the bandana is a camera, and that was Shannon's camera.
Camera, okay. That's exhibit 49, it's already been introduced. Exhibit 137,
Those are just some receipts that were in her purse.
and those have been her receipts from Sunspot.
Yes, sir. That's her writing. To 17. And that's I guess her pay sheet.
Exhibit 139, exhibit 139. Exhibit 140,
Underneath Chris's hat, there's one of the shoes that she would wear to work. The Wallabies.
Wallabies.
That's the Wallabies.
Exhibit 141.
That's what she walked down the house
I
with.
was going to ask you those shoes she had on today.
Yes, sir.
Exhibit 142,
That's a pair of golf club shoes, excuse me, she had just gotten for Christmas. She'd grown up on the golf course and she finally decided that she wanted to learn to play, so her daddy got her pair of golf shoes.
exhibit 145,
That's one of her pay stubs.
exhibit 149,
It's my Blockbuster card that she'd keep in her purse.
exhibit 153.
That's me.
Okay.
She liked to keep that to make fun of me.
Exhibit
It's one of
155,
the CDs that she had made.
exhibit 157.
That's her jewelry. Some hair things that were actually mine, but she usually ended up with my stuff. And then the little note that says, I love you. The letter from Kara. All of that's hers, or mine.
And the document in the lower right-hand corner appears to have a burn mark.
Is that one for pay stubs? I can't, oh, I can see it right here. Yes, sir, that's pay stub.
Exhibit 158,
Okay. Well, she always kept deodorant in her purse, so I don't know what brand she had at the time, but that's her water bottle, the jewelry, the lotion. That little pink and orange bag was hers. There's her birth control, her socks, her makeup, a card from Salon Visage. It looks like her work keys, maybe.
all those hers.
Yes, sir, but the purse is not.
Okay. Exhibit 156, kind of just an overall view of some
Yes,
of those
sir.
items.
That's pretty much stuff that would have been in her purse.
Okay. Exhibit 160,
Now, the Have a Good Day was in her car, along with a letter from Kara. And then Buffalo Wild Wings, they went there a lot. So most of that's probably paperwork from her purse.
from the purse or the car.
Her purse, except for the little note was in her car.
Okay. Exhibit 161,
That's from Specialty Select, where she worked at the hospital, my picture again. And then, I know those hats are Chris's, but I don't recognize bikini bottoms at all.
okay. Exhibit 170,
Those are the jeans she was gonna wear to the party that night.
and were you there when she selected those?
Yes, sir.
Put in the bag, the
Yes, sir.
overnight bag,
Those are her Big Star.
big star jeans?
You have to understand, my daughter was almost 5'9", very tall, slim, but she had a 36 inseam. So I couldn't buy cheap pants because we had to get them long enough. Because even though she was tall, it didn't matter. She was going to wear those heels, so we had to find clothes and pants long. That's one of the T-shirts.
One of her t-shirts.
Mhm.
Exhibit 172,
Those are her sweatpants. Those are the pants she wore in the house that day to work.
174,
Those were a pair of her khaki pants that she had in the back of, in one of those bags she was going to get rid of.
175,
Those were the boxers she slept in. One of her shirts was in the back of the 4Runner.
Is that one she was gonna give away as well?
Yes, sir. That's one that was too small, she was gonna give away.
178,
That was in the back of the 4Runner.
179,
That was in the back of the 4Runner.
180,
Those are some of her dress pants that were in the back of the 4Runner.
181,
It's hers, it was her.
182,
That was in the back of the 4Runner.
184,
That's just one of the camisoles that she wore. She didn't even wear a t-shirt that she didn't wear a camisole under. She was always had one on.
okay. 185,
That was one of her t-shirts.
188,
Now that is her purse.
and then
And that, the silver one is her purse, and then that Vera Bradley bag was hers. That Lexus first aid kit was in her car. That was something she had. It looks like her keys, makeup. I can't tell what the receipts are.
either from her purse or the car.
Yes, sir. The UT parking passes were probably in her car,
Okay.
but the Vera Bradley bag was probably in her car in her backpack for school.
191,
Again, there's her birth control. It looks like her card to get into the hospital for work. Some more sunscreen, the picture of her debit card, these cell phones weren't like they are now where you use them for your pictures. So she had several of these cameras that she was going to take to have them developed.
192,
Those are actually, I believe, Chris's boxers that she somehow acquired to sleep in. And that bag was a bag that she had in her car. And she'd gotten that little lint roller for Christmas. The cigarettes are not hers, but pretty much everything else there.
Exhibit 110,
This is one of the items, if you can see it, right there.
we did like that, it's hard to see, it's dark photo.
I don't know if y'all can see, but there's a green bag where he's circling. It's green and it has stripes. It's got orange and white, maybe some red stripes, and that has brown leather handles. That was the bag that she carried out of the door with her clothes on for the party that night. And that was a bag I kept asking General Fitzgerald and them about where is it, because I knew she had it in the car. And it got left in Kentucky with Vanessa's stuff all in it. And so half of her stuff that was probably there I couldn't find was left there. But that's the bag I tried to find for years.
Exhibit 308,
The bottle of cologne and lotion in the burgundy, that was a gift from Chris that she got for Christmas. And I can't see the name on the pharmacy tag, but that very well could be where she got her birth control. And then the orange bag probably has pencils in it. That looks more like her deodorant there and her keys. And then that's her wallet and makeup.
that's what.
Cross-examination?
No question,
Oh, I guess I don't.
You can sit down.
Thank you, sir.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, it is lunchtime and your lunch is here, so we'll go ahead and break for lunch. We'll start back at 1 o'clock.
Well, you can help us.